All right, welcome back to True Law Stories. I'm Garlic here, and I've got our fabulous returning guest, Mr. Tim Semelroth, one of the premier truck accident attorneys from Iowa, and we're going to talk about a pretty horrific and wrongful death case today. And it's super interesting, but I think everyone will be interested in it. But Tim, thanks again for being on True Law Stories again.
It's always a pleasure to join you.
All right. And, if you watch, you'll learn all about Tim's stories, previous episodes. We'll put a link to those in the show notes. There's some pretty crazy stories. Also, one of my favorite stories is how Tim became an attorney. You should go watch his video on that. But today we're going to talk about the wrongful death case in Iowa and some of the interesting things you had to do to get the family as much as they want, as much as they needed. Because I think this is such an important thing for people to go through. First of all, tell us a little bit about the couple here and a little bit about Dan and Cari.
Sure. So I represented the family of a man named Dan Heron. And Dan was a lifelong resident of Iowa. He was a blue-collar worker. He worked at the DuPont plant here in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And he and his wife, Cari, had 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls. And Cari is a nurse, and they were living a great life just outside of Cedar Rapids in a small town in Benton County.
And, tell me a little bit more about Dan and Cari, because and their relationship, because it is an important piece to this.
Right. So I actually met Dan when I was 10 years old. We met in a Boy Scout troop. And so there was a stretch of about 4 years when we were growing up where we would see each other every week at scout meetings or campouts or things like that. And we ended up going to different high schools and sort of lost track of each other. I'd occasionally see him at a high school wrestling meet. We both wrestled in high school. And then, as I left town to go to college and to go to law school, we lost touch. But during that time, he met Cari, his wife, and they had a family. And he, by all accounts, was an amazing husband and an amazing dad. He was the kind of guy who would work a double shift and come home and go out in the backyard and play catch with one of his kids before dinner.
That's, and, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but, you said something when we were talking about this before, is like didn't one of the attorneys say he's the type of dad that makes you want to be a better dad?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's, one of the things, I thought I knew Dan, but I learned a lot more about him and the kind of man he grew up to be representing his family.
And how old were the kids when all this happened?
They were teenagers, anywhere from just graduating high school to still, still in middle school.
Gotcha. And so tell me a little bit, obviously Dan worked at this factory. How did Cari find out what happened?
Well, unfortunately, it was getting a call from one of his coworkers saying that a horrible thing had happened, and that she needed to make sure that the kids were taken care of, and she needed to come to Cedar Rapids right away.
Wow. And so obviously, she finds out about the accident. Does she find out right away exactly what happened?
No. That's the problem when a bad injury happens on the job. a lot of times the powers that be at a particular company will tell the employees that they are not allowed to speak to anybody outside the company. So even though Dan had a lot of good friends who were coworkers, they were all instructed to share as little as possible about what happened.
And why is that? Is that common?
It is. It is. The employer obviously is concerned about whether or not they have responsibility for what happened. Do they was there a mistake on their end, and so they want to research that. And then obviously when you have an injury that happens on a workplace, OSHA is involved. So OSHA is going to come in and do its own investigation, and so it's pretty it's pretty common. It's not necessarily a you know uh, something that surprises me when I hear that the supervisor said, "Hey, nobody talks to anybody other than OSHA or our company representatives at first."
And for those that don't know what OSHA is, can you explain what OSHA is?
Sure. So OSHA, there's both a federal and a state version of OSHA, but it is the government entity that uh, is responsible for enforcing workplace safety rules.
Gotcha. And tell me about when you first found out what happened, and like when they first called you.
Well, it was a tough phone call because, like I said, I probably hadn't spoken to Dan in over a decade, but I got a call from his dad, and his dad was one of my scoutmasters, and so even though I hadn't seen him in a while, he called me up and said, "Tim, something terrible happened to Dan, and my my family would really like you to look into this and see what we can do for Cari and the kids."
When they came to my house the day after and told me that they reached out to Tim at RSH Legal, I guess it was so hard for me to process just because, I lost my husband. We didn't even get to see him. Like, it kind of made it more real that he was gone. But I also needed the help.
So when that happens and you find out, hey, they're not giving up any evidence, they're not talking about anything, you need to get in there. What's your first thing you have to do?
Well, first of all, there are some things that we can request from OSHA using a Freedom of Information Act request, and so we're going to send out those requests right away. I knew, the family knew that a semi truck was involved. And so, because of that, uh, we were able to identify where the trucking company was from, and we immediately send out letters of representation and most importantly, evidence preservation letters to Dan's employer, to the trucking company of the truck that killed him, saying, "Hey, you need to preserve all evidence related to this, and we want a chance to inspect the truck before it is put back into service."
And it's because we talked about this on a previous episode, when we talked about another woman's accident, because which was so surprising to me. They don't have to keep that evidence, do they?
No, no. A trucking company is allowed to destroy certain pieces of certain records within 6 months. And obviously, if they're not put on notice that they need to uh, delay repairing the vehicle, that means that they could start getting the vehicle repaired as soon as the law enforcement releases it. And so that's why it's so important when somebody's been injured by a truck that you get a lawyer involved as soon as possible, because there is so much important information that can be found during an inspection. And if you contact me 3 months after the incident, a lot of that is already gone.
It's crazy. It's crazy to think that after an accident that they can just be like, okay, we're just going to turn this over. Um, but so now next up, you get all this information. What were some of the key things that you found out right away as you got this information? Because you didn't see the footage right away, right?
Right. So that was something we were able to get through the Freedom of Information Act request from OSHA. OSHA came in because there was a fatality on company property, and they were able to get the security footage. And so while it didn't show exactly what happened, uh, we were able to piece together uh, what happened and why pretty quickly once we got that OSHA documentation.
And so, what did you discover? What happened? When did you realize, hey, I know what happened?
It was after reviewing the OSHA report and seeing the video footage. And so, what had happened was Dan had a job where he would meet tanker trucks and help load them with pumping in chemicals into the tanker, and then the truck would leave and deliver that. And so this particular truck, which was from Illinois, uh, that when this driver came onto the property, uh, we could see from the footage that he never got out of the truck. And we were able to look at the temperature that day, and we could see why. It was a bitterly cold winter day. And so, the truck driver did not get out of the truck. You could see that Dan went up to the cab and communicated with the truck driver, and Dan was the one who took the lead in with pumping the tanker. And then what obviously happened was the truck driver believed it was okay to go ahead and drive off at some point, and unfortunately, Dan was still near the trailer, and so he ended up when the truck driver drove off, he ran over Dan and killed him.
Oh my gosh. So, I mean, obviously, at this point, it's a lot. I mean, it seems pretty obvious that there's some responsibility here from the company, from the driver. Um, you know, what is going on in Carrie's head, though? I mean, because she just wants to get this done and get past this. Shouldn't she just be taken care of? What's happening in her mind?
Well, Dan was an equal partner, as a breadwinner for the family. So, first of all, obviously, the first thing that she's thinking is, how am I going to tell my kids that their dad was killed? And once you get past that and you get through the funeral, then you start thinking of things like, am I going to be able to keep the house? Am I, without Dan's income, how am I going to put the kids through college? What Dan was a handyman. It's like how all the things that Dan did around the house, did for their family. All of those things now fell on her shoulders, and so during those first days, weeks, and months, it was how am I going to keep together a life for my children?
The week after losing my husband still seems surreal. It's kind of hard to remember each day. My daughter's birthday was just 4 days after the accident, so I had to try to pull it together to get everything organized for my husband's funeral so that my daughter didn't have to experience her dad's funeral on her birthday. After that, my brother-in-law came over every day, helped me figure out everything I needed to figure out. So It was a week of no sleep, not knowing right from left or what was even going on.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I mean, I've friends and stuff that this has happened to, and been through the loss of parents, and I mean, obviously, no one ever thinks it's going to happen, right? No one ever thinks it's going to happen. It's hard to plan for it, but that's why we have insurance, and you hope that the company is going to take care of you. You know, how does it usually? I mean, what are the important things for people to realize at this point when they've been through this and they're trying to figure out next steps with their lives?
Well, at this point, there are so many details, so many insurance companies reaching out. Is it the workers' compensation company for the employer? Are they, contacting you? What are your rights under that system? Is it your life insurance, if you have life insurance? Is it the insurance company for the trucking company? Are they reaching out, wanting to take a recorded statement? And it can be impossible to keep track of who all of these parties are, all of these companies, what their motivation is.
Mm,
Can you trust them? Should you be wary of them? And trying to do all that while you're grieving, while you're trying to take care of your kids who are grieving, is really more than you can ask of anybody. And so, in this situation, the what her family realized that Carrie needed more than anything else was somebody who could take that off her plate, could immediately start acting on behalf of the family when dealing with all of these insurance companies, and just making sure that the family had space to grieve.
mm. And obviously, the first instinct is that space to grieve. But and having and talked to so many personal injury attorneys about these types of cases, it's so important to think about the future at this moment too, isn't it? And really hire the right person who's thinking about all that stuff, because there's a lot of little steps that could impact their entire lives.
Yes, and I mean, luckily, the family got a lot of good advice. I mean, this wasn't something where it was just the dad saying, "Hey, I remember Tim from 30 years ago in Boy Scouts." It was a situation where uh, you had parents, you had brothers-in-law, you had everybody was sort of doing their own informal research for who's the lawyer, who's the law firm that's best prepared to to do the best that you can for this family. And because it involved a semi truck, what I'm told is they all kept hearing the same answer, which is, you should go talk to Tim.
Yeah, and obviously, I mean, that's your area of specialization. You're the only, board certification. For those of you that don't know board certification, I think it's an important thing. It's really the only person I'd say they're an expert is if they're board certified, and you're still the only one in Iowa, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so, you know, it's hard unless you're going through it to think about these little details that add up. But what were some of the little things that you found out that made a big impact on the case that maybe someone who wasn't an expert would miss?
Sure. So, the first place that people think of where they're going to get compensation if you're injured or killed on the job is the workers' compensation system. And there are certain benefits that are to be paid to the family of a worker who dies on the job. And so the first thing to realize is that's the beginning of the conversation, not the end of it. And secondly, uh, you can go talk to an attorney about those benefits without, even if you're already being paid your work comp benefits, you should talk to an attorney and find out what's possible in the system. It's not going to cost you anything, because if you're being voluntarily paid work comp benefits, a lawyer will not take a fee on benefits you're already receiving. And so, that's step one. But in a situation involving a semi truck, then I mean you have to prove fault, which is different than work comp, and so you have to start doing the research to show why did this happen and why, if everybody was following the rules, should it have not happened? And that was really the issue. In trucking, there is a concept called goal, and it means get out and look around, and that is the truck driver's responsibility when they're moving their vehicle is to make sure that they can do so without posing a danger to anybody else. And unfortunately, uh, because it was a cold day, the truck driver cut corners, didn't follow the procedure that he should have followed, and that's why Dan was killed. Now, the real question in these trucking cases is not just did the truck driver do wrong. The question is why, and that's why you have to really dig into the company policies. Was this driver appropriately trained? Was this driver, should he have been behind the wheel of the car, or behind the wheel of the truck? And that those were things that we look into in any truck driving case.
And there were a couple small details that actually ended up being a huge impact to the case too, correct?
Yes. So, for example, we learned that the truck driver is a resident of Cook County, Illinois, so Chicago. And even though we could have filed the case here in Iowa, we knew that it would be much more beneficial for the family if the case was filed in Chicago, because Chicago has a history. Chicago courts have a history of significantly bigger jury verdicts than what we get in Iowa. And so it put the insurance company for the trucking company at much more risk if we could get the case filed in Chicago. So that once we realized that that's where the truck driver was from, then our focus turned to let's find a way to file the case in Chicago. And part of that involves making sure that you're associating with a lawyer in Chicago who is going to be able to keep it there, because the trucking company is going to do everything in its power to get the case moved out of Chicago if it can.
It's interesting because I always, when I talk to attorneys, I always ask them like, well, how would you decide on an attorney? Because it's usually a hypothetical thing, right? But at this point, you're actually deciding on an attorney. How did you decide on that attorney?
Well, we knew that the important fight in Chicago was not going to be about uh, whether or not the truck driver was at fault or the extent of the loss for the Heron family. We knew that the fight was going to be about, did we have a legal standing to keep the case in Cook County? And that was going to be decided by a judge. And so the most important thing that we were looking for in co-counsel in Chicago is a firm who had the highest reputation possible with the judges in Cook County, and had a track record of being a good briefing firm, and somebody who could convince the judge in Cook County to keep it there. And so we reached out to one of our many contacts around the country in the trucking litigation world, and we found the perfect partner.
So who's the partner?
So I reached out to Tim Tomasic from Tomasic and Coton. Tim is a past president of the Chicago Bar Association, and is one of the real giants in the Chicago legal community. And I knew his firm. I've done cases with his partners, and I knew that that would be the right firm to partner with.
And what I want to make something clear because I think this is really interesting, and I think most people wouldn't get this. Is you had to then give up a percentage of how much money you were going to make down the road, didn't you?
Yes. So when somebody hires us in a wrongful death case, they're hiring us on a contingency fee basis, which means that our fee is a percentage of what we recover for them, either in settlement or in trial. And so when you decide that you're going to co-counsel, that doesn't mean that that's an additional expense. You're going to have to pay them out of your percentage. And so while it maybe meant that I was, potentially going to earn less, I knew that for the family, it increased the likelihood that they were going to end up with more money, and that's why I thought it was important to get the case filed in Chicago.
So when Tim and I sat down and talked about, you don't want to talk about money, but like the fees and what my responsibility would be, knowing that that wasn't something I had to worry about every time I needed a question or advice or just an update on what's going on, I didn't have to worry about money adding up because Tim explained to me the contingency fee. If this works out and there's a settlement, that's how he gets paid. If not, he doesn't get paid. But he still, Tim and the whole team worked very hard for me. That wasn't even a concern to them.
Gotcha. And we'll talk about that result, but obviously you were somewhat close to the family. I mean, a childhood friend, but separated. But I know, interviews with Cari and your other clients too, you get really close to your clients. Why was that important in this case to get close to them?
Well, you have to be able to communicate to the insurance company what was lost, what was taken from this family. And you can't do that without really knowing uh, what kind of husband Dan was, what kind of father he was. And so the best way to find out those things is to interview the people that knew him best. I sat down and spent hours talking to Cari, talking to each of the kids, talking to family members, talking to coworkers, family friends, and we recorded all those interviews, and at the end of that process, I knew Dan better than I did even actually when we were friends, and it was really impressive, the life that he had built for his family.
Tim took the time and his assistants to get to know each one of my children so that they understood who Dan was as a father, to understand the loss of someone that special. He spoke with some of his dearest friends, coworkers, other family members. I felt like everybody here, I think, probably knows who Dan was, even if they didn't meet him. And so that was more comforting than anything.
I know just me personally doing these interviews, and like I might interview one or two, clients. It's tough though to hear the stories and know what happened. How do you work through that personally?
Well, you realize why you're doing it, right? It's you're doing it because it's gonna benefit the family. And so there's a reason behind it, but also it's inspiring. One of the things that I do is in a wrongful death case, is I ask each person who I interview to bring in their favorite photo of the person who passed away, and I have them tell me about why they love that photo so much, and that really sort of opens up who that person was to whoever I'm interviewing. And so sure, there are parts of it that are sad, but there are also parts of it that are really beautiful. And so I come away from those interviews inspired and motivated to do the best job I can for the family.
Um, so you made this video and you interviewed these people. How did you use that then in the case?
Sure. So in a lawsuit, when you file a lawsuit, oftentimes your clients are going to have to go through a deposition. And that's when the lawyers for the other side ask them questions under oath. And it's done in a conference room with all the lawyers involved. And it can be a very stressful experience for people, particularly children, right? And so I knew that if I did a good enough job on this, basically a documentary about Dan and his life and the kind of the kind of husband and father he was, that there was a possibility that the other side would say, we've got the information we need. We don't need to put the family through a deposition, and so I'm always keeping that in mind. The other thing that I'm doing is I want to make sure the people who are ultimately making the decision about what the case is worth, whether it is the insurance company committee or whatever, I want to make sure that they have to sit and watch this so that they really know who this man was. And so one of the things that I did after I made this video was I told the insurance company for the trucking company that before we would agree to participate in settlement negotiations, they had to assure me that anybody who was a decision maker had watched this video, and it was about 20 minutes long. And then when we ultimately went to a mediation, I made sure the mediator watched it. And what that did was just put everybody on the same page. We weren't going to have any discussions about, the quality of Dan's life and the role that he played in, for his wife and for his kids, because they could see it, they could hear it from their own lips, they could hear it from the people that knew them best, and they could see the pictures that showed the depth of the relationship.
It's a powerful video. And that obviously that you're going for settlements, and you're about to go to mediation. But why is trial experience important if someone just wants to settle? Because obviously Cari wants to get on with her life. She wants to put this past her. She wants to grieve, move on, make sure the kids are taken care of. So for a lot of people like this, they don't want to go and spend weeks, months preparing for trial, being in trial, possibly even years of setting it up. Why is the trial experience so important, though, to have?
Because one of the key factors that an insurance company or whoever the defendant is in your case is going to look at is the trial experience of the lawyer who's representing the family. And if the family chooses a lawyer who doesn't go to trial, the insurance company knows that, and they are not going to put their top dollar on the table. If somebody has a track record of always settling, always taking the last offer the insurance company makes, the insurance company has no motivation to put their top dollar on the table to settle the case. And so that's why it seems it seems backwards. But if you want to settle your case, you need to be working with a lawyer who goes to trial.
And so tell me a little bit about, how the mediation process, because I don't think people realize that. How did that get set up, and who's there, and what's going on?
Sure. So a mediation typically happens after you reach the stage of litigation where both sides have shared their evidence, right? Like uh, we know all the documents that that the defendant has, and I've deposed the truck driver, I've deposed the safety manager for the trucking company, we've deposed coworkers potentially, and then they have. Our clients have answered questions under oath. They've had a chance to look at medical records, employment records, tax returns, And then obviously they had a chance to watch the video that we put together. And so both sides were able then to look at the same evidence and evaluate what we thought a jury in Cook County would do with that information. And that's another reason why having somebody, having a good partner uh, in Chicago was important, because they knew Chicago juries and they knew what was possible in front of a Chicago jury and what wasn't. And so then once the mediation happens, you've got a mediator. It's somebody that both sides agree on, and they're facilitating a negotiation where, in one room you have the trucking company and their insurance companies and their lawyers, and then in the other room, you had me and Cari and our Chicago counsel, and then the mediator goes back and forth between the two rooms to try to identify whether or not there's common ground, and we'll raise questions and arguments that each side has and get a response, and basically just is there uh, to focus the negotiation, and that's what happened in this case.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's like, because you always think of it's like this head-to-head battle, and it's not really, is it, at that point?
No, not in a mediation. I mean, there's advocacy going on. We're making our arguments, but a lot of times, we're doing those ahead of time, because the thing that people don't appreciate is the decision as to how much money is going to be offered at the end of the mediation has already been decided. If it's a significant case, it's already been decided by a committee at the insurance company. And the mediation is simply a process to get them to put their last dollar on the table. So then you and your client can sit down and say, is this an amount that you can live with, or are we going to go to trial to see if we can do better, recognizing that there's always a risk of doing worse.
Gotcha. What was the moment you knew, because it was over, and what the result was?
Well, what happened was, after a full day of negotiations, the mediator, who used to be the chief judge in Cook County, is now retired. Uh, he came into our room and said, if I can get you, this number, is this something that you can live with? And of course, we had been talking about that, and we were constantly having a discussion with Cari for weeks before this about, what did she need to be able to take care of her kids in the way that she and Dan, would have wanted, and what was she going to need so that she could live her life and keep the house and all that sort of thing. And so we had a general idea of what amount of money would be something that the family could live with. And the good news was, we were able to get a lot more than that. And so once they got beyond a certain number, I knew that Cari would probably ultimately decide to take it, and you could just see it. I mean, you could see just her body, all the tension just released from her body as it dawned on her that there was going to be an end that day.
Um, so, that's going on, and this is happening, and you see that tension release. How did you feel in that moment?
I felt extremely proud, because this family deserved all of the effort that we put into it. I mean, this took over a year, and so it was a team effort by the people at our firm, the people at the firm in Chicago, and so I just felt very proud, because I knew that this family was worth every hour, every minute that we had put into the case, and I knew that she was just going to walk out of our office with just a weight lifted from her shoulder, and I knew she deserved that.
The feeling I felt when I left was that I don't need to know everything, that I didn't need to know how to figure this aspect of taking care of my kids. I needed to figure out how to get them to practices on my own and cook for them and clean. Tim made me feel like the financial part or those worries that I couldn't focus on at the time, I didn't have to think about at that moment.
And I mean, you got this great result for her. I think one thing that I want to make sure is clear is, kind of, you think about Indiana Jones. I don't know if you know this theory about Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's like if you take Indiana Jones out of the Raiders of the Lost Ark, everything in Raiders of the Lost Ark still happens, right? So a lot of people might go, well, the insurance company would have given her this money. She would have been taken care of. Everything would have been taken care of if not for Tim. What do you usually see when someone just tries to do this on their own, or does it, happen? Not tries to get it done as fast as possible.
Well, it's unfortunate because how I see that scenario playing out is somebody comes to me after they've agreed to settle a case. And maybe if it's an injury case, maybe it's a year after and they realize they need more medical treatment than they thought. And, but they didn't have money included in their settlement for that additional medical treatment. And so they're coming to me saying, what can I do? I settled a case, but I don't, I have this treatment that's related to my injury, and now I'm going to have to pay for it out of pocket. And, and that's a horrible, a sad situation because, I once I hear their story, I know it's like, gosh, if we had just talked before you did that, you wouldn't be in this situation. But unfortunately, there are so many things that can happen where you can say the wrong thing or you can sign the wrong thing. And it doesn't matter what lawyer you get after you've made a mistake like that, you're never going to get the result that you deserved.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of the lesson here to folks is that it's really in the end, speaking to an attorney, I've heard some of these horror stories, and that's why I want to feature this too, because obviously you've got this amazing results, and Cari was able to get on with her life. And so tell me how you were able to take care of the kids and family now with this settlement.
Well, the one of the things that you can do in a settlement situation is you can structure the money that is going to the kids. So, in other words, if you settle a case and you don't have something in place, whenever the kids turn 18, they get it all. And, anybody who's been around 18-year-olds knows that probably having them end up with, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars when they're 18 is a recipe for, for a lot of poor financial choices, right? And so one of Carrie's big concerns was, obviously her kids were entitled to money for losing their dad, but she wanted to make sure that that money was going to come to them at times in their life when they could financially handle it. And so we were able to sit down and basically have the trucking company buy annuities for the kids that would pay out a certain amount when they turned 18, but would save most of it for, once they got out of college and we're getting, having financial things that as they started their life, whether it was, money to buy their first car or to put a down payment on their house or to pay for college. And so, each of the kids, had different, different goals. And so one of the things we did was we sat down with each of them and identified what those were. And then we made sure that the settlement money that was going to each of them was going to be, protected until they needed it.
Fantastic. And that's great. And, it's interesting. I was watching the interview with Cari, and she said it's like, it's part of Dan's legacy. It's what Dan would have done, right? It's
Yeah.
exactly how he would have handled it.
Yeah. No, one of the stories that, I still remember from the video that we did was talking about how, I mean, Dan was a huge fan of his kids' school achievements. I mean, it didn't matter if he worked all night, on third shift. If there was a school assembly where they were getting an award for their grades, he was there, just like he was there for every baseball game, just like he was there, for every golf meet. And so it was something where, you everybody knew how important his kids' education was, and he was going to move mountains to make sure that they could go as far as they wanted to academically. And that's, one of the legacies of the settlement is that that was going to be covered for his kids.
Amazing, amazing. Um, you know, when you obviously this is a big part of what you do, but at the end of the day, when you see this, you've built this up over time. You know, wh- what is it? What's the end outcome to you? I mean, obviously, you've got the result and you say you're proud, but how does that make you feel overall about what you do?
Well, it makes me feel like the sacrifices that I make, that my team makes, the late nights, the work on the weekends, the driving to visit people in their homes, it makes it feel like it was worth it, because we were serving people when they needed us the most. And when you have these opportunities to work for people, work for families who are truly deserving of, because they've lived good, admirable lives, it just motivates you to do everything possible, use all of your skills, use all of your energy, all of your efforts on their behalf, because they're worth it.
Since the resolution of the case, the kids and I could go forward. I mean, we think about Dan every day, but the assurance that they can still go to college or they can reach for their goals, and I'm able to help them with that. Everything that I help my kids do, like my daughter moving to Arizona, I remind them that's still their dad taking care of them. Everything. I don't ever take full praise from my kids when they thank me for something, because without the settlement and Tim's help, we wouldn't be able to do those things. I don't know how I would have done it.
Well, Tim, this is an amazing story. Obviously, if you know anyone that's been involved in a truck accident in Iowa, we'll put a link to Tim's firm, RSH Legal, in the show notes. But Tim, thank you so much for being on True Law Stories and sharing your story.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining Tim and I, making us part of your story that's been Iron Garlic and True Law Stories.